All right. Welcome everybody. Welcome. And that Aerosmith song to tease off our theme for the day, which is dreams. We're going to look at dreams today. And of course, there are at least two huge names in Jewish history that are associated with dreams. And one of them is Sigmund Freud, of course. And but the other great name is a figure that lived long before Freud's dream interpretations, and that is Joseph. Joseph, the dream interpreter. That's actually there. Joseph is one of the most incredibly textured characters in the Torah, right up there. And there are many things that Joseph is known for, but I might say that his greatest power, or at least the one that propels him to greatness, is his power of dream interpretation, and it's a power he just seems to have naturally. Although that's one of the questions I want to be asking today. Where did he get these powers, and what are these powers? How does he do the work that he does? And along the way, I want to be asking just generally about how does that whole field of interpretation work, and what is Freud doing? What does it mean to interpret a dream? Can we listen to a dream and understand something about, well, I don't know, the person, the future, some deep meaning or message from God, maybe from the unconscious? These are the sorts of questions that I want to be asking with you all today. You may have seen that I wrote a piece this week for Hadar that touched on a lot of these themes. I'm going to put that here in the chat. And you can sign up to get these weekly, but this is this week's essay. And in that essay, I highlighted, I'll just start with one thing I said there, and then we're going to go look at other things. But one thing I said there is that Joseph is called a dream interpreter, a poter, it's called. That's the verb liftor, poter, and in fact, those who are dreaming are seeking a poter. That chalom chalamnu, we dreamed dreams. Ve'ein poterotam. There's nobody to interpret them. This is the thing that they seek, is an interpreter, and Joseph becomes that interpreter. And one of the remarkable things that I realized in writing this essay, that I pointed out this week, is that verb, that word, that root, interpretation, is only ever used with Joseph. We don't find that word, pei tafresh, we'll see it soon, anywhere else in the Hebrew Bible. That's remarkable. So there's something that Joseph is doing that is entirely unique, and I want to spend some time today thinking about what did he have? What is it that he might be tapped into here? And we are this week in Parshat Mikeitz, and so we're going to spend most of our time on Pharaoh's dreams. That's where we begin this week's Parsha, is hearing Pharaoh's dreams. But I'll just say the obvious structural thing before we begin. If we wanted to ask, well, what's going on with Pharaoh's dreams? What's going on with Joseph's interpretations of Pharaoh's dreams? If we want to get into that, surely we would have to consider that in last week's Parsha, we had another two sets of two dreams. Okay? We had two dreams that Joseph dreamed when we first met Joseph. That was the beginning of Parshat Vayeshev. And then we find that at the end of Parshat Vayeshev, Joseph is in prison, and there are two prisoners who each have a dream, and Joseph interprets them. So there's another set of two dreams, and now Pharaoh dreams two dreams. So there's something going on here. Two dreams, two dreams, two dreams. And So we'll be looking at this week's Parsha, but of course asking how those other episodes might inform our understanding of this dream sequence and its interpretation. Okay, let's take a blessing pause here, and then we'll get into it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, all right, so let's begin. Here we are. I'm going to give you a source sheet, and we're going to get right into it by looking at the opening of this week's Parsha, Parshat Mikeitz, which means at the end, or from the end, or at the conclusion of Mikeitz, at the conclusion of 2 years. And those 2 years are the 2 years since we heard Joseph interpreting the dreams in prison. And at the end of those interpretations, Joseph says, okay, I've given you an interpretation. Just remember to mention me to Pharaoh. And the Sara Mashkim, the cupbearer, forgets to mention him to Pharaoh. So he languishes in prison for another 2 years. And then when Pharaoh has these 2 dreams and nobody can interpret them, and that's part of the problem, nobody can interpret them. Finally, the cupbearer says, oh, wait a minute, I remember there was a young Hebrew I was in prison with, and he knows how to interpret dreams. Okay, so at the end of those 2 years of waiting, Joseph is suddenly summoned from prison. All right, here is a source sheet for today. And I want to just start by taking a look at Pharaoh's dreams, which we actually see in full twice in this week's Parsha. We begin with Pharaoh having the dreams, and then when Joseph is summoned, Pharaoh retells Joseph the dreams, and it's pretty much the same thing. So there we get a lot of review of these 2 dreams. What I want to do now, just to start with, is to read through and to ask you, how would you interpret these dreams? And okay, probably many of you are already aware of how they are interpreted, and they seem to be interpreted correctly, so it's hard not to say, oh, these dreams are a predictor of future famine. That's what Joseph is going to say, but let's try our best to put that out of our minds and just focus on the dreams themselves. And what would you make? Is famine the answer you would have come up with? Okay, so let's take a look. Dream interpretation. Okay, Vayehi, and so it was. Mikeitz shnatayim yamim ufaro cholem. It was after 2 years' time, and Pharaoh dreamed. This is the word. This is our kind of key word for today. Cholem. He dreamed. Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. When out of the Nile there came up 7 cows. Vehine minayor olot sheva parot yafot. 7 cows, handsome and sturdy. Yafot marei uvriot. And they grazed in the reed grass. But presently 7 other cows came up from the Nile, close behind them, ugly and gaunt. Raot marei v'dakot. And they stood beside the cows on the banks of the Nile. Okay, so he's standing near the Nile. 7 nice cows come up out of the Nile, which is weird in itself. And then 7 other cows come up, shriveled and unhealthy. And then the ugly gaunt cows ate up the 7 handsome sturdy cows. And Pharaoh awoke. That's it. Dream 1, 7 healthy cows come up out of the Nile. 7 other unhealthy cows come up out of the Nile. The unhealthy ones eat the healthy ones. Now, what would you do with that dream? What does that mean? Do you have any inclination? Oh, that's what it meant. What do cows symbolize? What does 7 symbolize? Why are they coming up out of the Nile? Why fat? Why skinny? All of these questions. But Pharaoh dreams 2 dreams. And so let's take a look at the other one, because Joseph will do the same thing. He will interpret them both together. So let's take a look at what the other one is. And it's similar. And Pharaoh woke, and then he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. 7 ears of grain, solid and healthy, grew on a single stalk. Sheva shibalim olot b'kaneh echad. And they were briot v'tovot, solid and healthy. This is the same language of healthy. that we had with the cows, but close behind them sprouted 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind. Shbalim dakot ushdufot kadim somchot achreim. Okay, and the thin ears swallowed up the 7 solid and full ears. Okay, so you can tell this is a parallel dream, but obviously there's a big difference, which is that they are plants instead of cows, and they're not coming up out of the Nile either. Oh, so there are some differences, but the thin, unhealthy stalks of grain are swallowing up the healthy, nice, beautiful stalks of grain, and then that's it. Then Pharaoh awoke, and it says, Vihine chalom, and it was a dream. Okay, so you know that moment when you wake up, you've had a nightmare, and oh my goodness, thank goodness it's a dream. So that's what it says here. Vihine chalom, it was a dream. Okay. Next morning, his spirit was agitated. V'tipaem rucho, and he sent for all the magician priests of Egypt, Chartumei Mitzrayim, and all of its sages, its chochmeha, and he told them his dream. And then here's the problem. Ve'ein poter otam leparo. And none of them could interpret Pharaoh's dream. Here's the verb that I said is exclusively used for Joseph, right? Here. Ein poter otam. There was nobody to interpret them. And Joseph is going to be that person. And Joseph is going to be that person. And that's what he becomes known for. So there's some sense that dream interpretation is possible. That he's searching for dream interpretation. He's got all kinds of, you would think, dream interpretation. That's just the area that sorcerers and prognosticators and wise people would be able to deal with, but nobody can deal with it. Okay, so let's just stop here. And before we get into Joseph's interpretation, and again, I don't want to hide the ball. It's obvious because we go through these stories again and again. Joseph says that the 7 years, 7 healthy cows are 7 good years, and the 7 unhealthy cows are 7 bad years. There's going to be 7 good years, and then there's going to be 7 bad years, and the 7 bad years are the years of famine that will like do away with all of the 7 good years. All right, so that's Joseph's interpretation. Would you go in a different direction? What do you see in this dream? By the way, I don't know that Joseph interprets it correctly. Maybe you have a better interpretation. Okay, so let's start with Elizabeth.
You know how they say that you are all the people in your dream? And so one interpretation could be that this is all about Pharaoh, that this is 7 good things he's done and 7 bad things he's done, or 7 healthy things in him and 7 unhealthy things in him. And so maybe the way I would have helped him interpret it would have been look at your own behavior and look at how how have you been with your children? How have you been with your wife? How have you been with your parents? What are the different aspects of you? And might there be something positive and negative in those behaviors? So I might have done a psychological number on him.
Good. Okay. Beautiful and well put. And that's a compelling interpretation. And you're also suggesting something about the meaning of dreams. That is, in this story, the dreams again and again are taken to be like predictive of future events. That's interesting. The Torah seems to present dreams as sort of pseudo prophecies, but Elizabeth is reminding us, or just speaking from a modern voice, and framing dreams as an insight into the person dreaming. I think that feels much more intuitive to us now, and maybe just naturally intuitive. Dreams are something that are happening inside your head. They're often, like kind of weird products of your own fears, anxieties, these are your thoughts. So let's use them to understand you. If you have like a, a dream about, standing naked in front of the classroom, and, then that's probably not because you're gonna stand naked in front of them. It's probably you are insecurity. That's the way we might use dreams to analyze not the world, but the subject. Okay, so that's good, and that provides a kind of contrast that we can use to think about these dreams. Noah Pollock.
Yeah, I have one sort of religious interpretation with the number 7 that's seemingly always a constant within the Torah, the 7 cycles of 7 with Shavuot, the 7 days and Sabbath. But here I'm just seeing that he's seen 7 beasts rising up from a source of life, and Pharaoh, being the king, is a provider of life for Egypt, or pretty much, quote unquote, the God king of Egypt, and that he's seen them come up from the water, and that's odd because these two things don't usually exist in comparison. But then another 7 cows come up. Odd enough, now we have 14. So with 14, there's I'm just going with the 7 weeks, 7 Sabbaths.
Good. Okay, good. So first of all, Noah focuses our attention on numbers, and there are numbers in all of Joseph's dreams. There are 11 stalks of grain or bundles of grain that bow down to him. In the dreams of the prisoners, there are 3 items which correspond to 3 days. So there's some kind of like tracking of the numbers and their meaning for some other numbered thing in the world. And that's a good example of, I see. So if we look at all these sets of dreams, we begin to develop a dream language, and Noah's helping us do that. And Noah is saying in this case, the number is 7, and there couldn't be a more significant number in the Torah. So surely we have to think about, 7 days of the week, 7 years in the sabbatical cycle, 7. I mean, we don't have these laws yet, but this is baked into Jewish tradition. We certainly have the 7 days of creation. And so we should speculate, we should take the numbers within the Torah. There's like the world of the dreamer, and then there's the whole world of the Torah and its set of associations. And maybe that's the way we ought to, as readers of the Torah, be interpreting dreams, just the way we might interpret any other passage in the Torah, by looking for all kinds of other connections in the language and the laws of the Torah. Okay, so we can play around with numbers here, as Noah's starting to do. Let's hear a few more thoughts. Payam.
I actually think there's a second obvious interpretation, and Joseph didn't say it on purpose, and that being that the Jewish slaves are going to rise up against the Egyptians. Because if you think about the thinness, I mean, those are the slaves and the agricultural references, and Egypt is clearly the fat cows and the fat corn. And I think Joseph knew that, but he purposely didn't say that because of the repercussions of that.
Okay, good. Okay. This is Payam's gotten us to exactly where I was hoping we would quickly arrive, which is the question of whether Joseph's interpretations are correct. And Pharaoh is convinced. You will see Pharaoh is convinced, and we act for the rest of the book of Genesis as if Joseph has successfully interpreted the dreams and is carrying it all out. But there are other possible interpretations, and as Joseph, I'm gonna just put a pin in this and come back to it, because as Joseph begins to interpret the dreams, there are a number of questions we can ask with regard to his method, and whether what we're getting from him is exactly what he thinks, what we should think, what is really happening in Pharaoh's head. Okay, so that's and Chaim suggested an alternative. Why isn't this dream about the malnourished slaves rising against their fat oppressors? That sounds like a good interpretation, but that wouldn't be a happy interpretation for Pharaoh. So one begins to wonder, what is Joseph? How is he deciding what he says and what he filters? Okay, Bob.
I think there's something very unfair about this at this point, and it's because Freud has taught us that a dream has to be interpreted after you hear it presented to you by the dreamer, and so that the differences between the dream as we've read them so far and the dream as Pharaoh repeats it or them to Joseph are very, very important differences. And those are the things that enable Joseph, I think, to make some interpretations that are relevant. And without that, we can't automatically say, well, okay, Pharaoh, the source of life is by the river, the source of life, but we don't yet know the degree to which Pharaoh personally is related to the land of Egypt and cares about the land of Egypt and the source of life, all of which is only showing up once we hear how Pharaoh describes the dream differently than what we've read already.
Good. Okay, great. So Bob gives us good instruction, and we will take it because we have heard about Pharaoh's dreams. We have not heard Pharaoh relate his own dreams. And Bob says that's a critical piece of dream interpretation, not just what the dream was, but how the dreamer speaks about it and tells it. So we will try to pay careful attention to Pharaoh's account of his own dreams. And Bob's right, that seems important to wait for. And along the way, I think Bob is saying something important about dreams. Elizabeth suggested that dreams should provide some insight into the psyche of the dreamer. And Bob's suggestions here are complementary, which is that therefore part of what you have to be listening for is not just the content of the dream, but how the dreamer tells it. Okay, so that's excellent. Hold on to that. We will get there. We're heading there. But let's take two more comments, and then we'll do a little movement in our lens of focus. But let's hear from Allison and then Leah.
Okay, well, thank you for opening up this conversation, because I think it's really interesting. And I guess what I'm going to say is like very much in the same conversation around like what is a dream and what are these dreams doing in the Torah. I think what Payan said was really interesting. I'm going to think about that for a long time. But what's been coming up for me is the relationship between Pharaoh's dreams and Joseph's dreams. And there is this kind of similarity in structure and the way that these dreams are both told in the Torah, and also like what's in the dreams. Like there are these things, and then these things happen, and in Pharaoh's dreams, one is bowing down to the other, or in Joseph's dreams. And so two things. One is, I think a lot about like Joseph's story and the arc of Joseph's story, in part because I think I admire Joseph and his attitude. But it's interesting to me, this moment in Joseph's life from the perspective of his journey, because in some ways it's almost like it doesn't actually show that much growth. Like when he was a young teenage boy, he had these dreams and he kind of naively went off and like ran to his brothers and ran to his dad and was like, this is like what the dream means. And he's sort of held on to this maybe like self-identity, or maybe there's like an inner knowingness that Joseph has around his ability to really connect with God through dreams. So that's just kind of interesting to me that Joseph has held on to this like self-identity as the dream interpreter. But The other thing that I just wanted to say is that there's another similarity between the way that the Torah describes these dreams, and that is the word hine, like, appears over and over again. Like when you read it in English, it's like, behold, there was this, and behold, there was that. And that's true for Joseph's dreams and for Pharaoh's dreams, but it's also true for Jacob's dream. When Jacob has the dream with the ladder, the Torah talks about it in exactly that same way. It's like, I have my Chumash in front of me because I just remembered this from when we read Jacob's ladder a few weeks ago. But and behold, Hashem was standing over him saying, I am Hashem. Behold, I am with you. Like it's that same construction of that word hine over and over again. And I wanted to lift that up because maybe it has something to do with the role of dreams in the Torah. I mean, think about the relationship between the word hine and hineni. Like here I am. Anyway, that's
okay. Great. Okay, so Allison is thank you for that. Is doing a lot of the setup for us because this is exactly where we're headed next. So thank you for making that connection, and I want to use that to take us right back there. That's the next source on the source sheet. We don't have time today to look at all 6 dreams. We just won't be able to cover that all in an hour. But I do want to do some comparative thinking. And I agree with Allison that Joseph's first dreams are especially worth looking at because there are some images in common, and as Allison says, there's even some language in common. So the main distinction between those dreams and these dreams is that Joseph is having those, and Joseph is not the interpreter. Joseph becomes the interpreter, but initially Joseph is the dreamer, and other people are giving interpretations of his dreams. So let's take a look at Joseph's first 2 dreams, and as Allison was doing, try to see what do we notice in those dreams that might set us up to understand Pharaoh's dreams, and might also set Joseph up to become someone who understands dreams. Okay, he's a dreamer, and then he becomes a dream interpreter. So let's take a look before we turn to Leah, just because Allison mentioned this, at the first set of dreams. And as Allison said, they're not the first dreams in the Torah. Jacob has also had dreams, and so have other figures in the Torah. Avimelech has had dreams. But let's take a look at Joseph's dreams. So these were Pharaoh's dreams. Now we're going to go back to last week's Parsha, and this is really where we meet Joseph. Joseph is 17 years old. We hear that he is his father's favorite, that he gets a special coat, and then we hear that Joseph had a dream. V'yachlam Yosef chalom. Joseph once had a dream, which he told to his brothers, and they hated him even more. They already hated him because he got that coat, because he was favored. Now they hated him even more. He said to them, Shimuna chalom hazeh asher chalamti. Listen to this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field, making bundles of grain in the field, when suddenly my sheaf stood up and remained upright, and then your sheaves gathered around and bowed low to my sheaf. Okay. So now that's the dream. That's the whole of it. Guess what? I had a dream, and all of you were bowing down to me, but not all of you, all of our, plants that represent your plants were bowing down to my, but the immediate feeling you have when Joseph tells these dreams is, oh my gosh, how obnoxious, right? Like, what is this dream about? It seems to be about Joseph wanting everybody to bow down to him. And so when his brothers respond, are they responding to the meaning, the offensive meaning that is implied by the dream, or are they interpreting the dream? Here is a kind of interpretation, although we're not going to call it dream interpretation in the way that Joseph is designated as a kind of savant dream interpreter. His brothers just say something much more basic and maybe aggressive, which is, do you mean to reign over us? Do you mean to rule over us? Well, who do you think you are? You're dreaming about our sheaves bowing down to yours. What do you think? You're the boss here? So we could ask that question. Are they interpreting right? Is this the meaning of the dream? And they hated him even more for his talk about his dreams. And then he dreams another dream, and he told it to his brothers as well, saying, look, I've had another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Okay, so we have a theme. Things bow down to Joseph, right? We have a theme. But now, again, I would just ask you, if you heard the first dream, would you, like the brothers, think, oh, you want us to bow down to you? And then if you heard the second dream, the sun, moon, and 11 stars, now that you've heard the first dream, what's the second dream mean? I sort of ... You can answer it in your head. But again, Jacob seems to have an understanding. He's interpreting the dream. So is Jacob interpreting this dream correctly? Let's take a look. And when he told it to his father and brothers, his father berated him and said, what is this dream you've dreamed? Are we to come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow low to you to the ground? So Jacob understands the dream to mean what? I, Jacob, am the sun. I guess that makes Rachel the moon, and the brothers are the stars. So initially, all the brothers are going to bow down. Now Joseph's parents are going to bow down. This is according to his family. But are they interpreting it right? Is this the correct understanding of the dream? How would you make sense of this dream? And we just end, this line is so great. His brothers were angry at him for the dream. So his brothers were seething at him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Shamar Tadavar. His father just sort of watched over just to see what would happen. And that's a little bit of a hint, like Jacob doesn't quite know what is the meaning of all this. Where is all this going? I'm going to see how all this plays out. But the brothers are convinced this is just a guy telling us that he wants to be the top dog around here, and everybody has to bow down to him. Okay, so I'm sort of throwing two questions at you at once. One question is the kind of question we were asking about the Pharaoh's dreams. What is the interpretation of what do these dreams mean? Are they being interpreted correctly? And the other question that I'm asking you is, well, what do we see here in these dreams that might help us understand Pharaoh's dreams or Joseph's role as a dream interpreter? I think I'd like to start there. What do we see in these dreams? Remember, there's 2 and 2, so we're almost being asked to connect these two dreams. How might we connect these two dreams? Okay, for all of that, when I see a hand and then I say something else and then come back, it's as if you have to answer my last question. You don't. I want to go back to Leah's thought from before I asked this question. But that is all at the end of Allison's, the link that Allison made for us between Joseph's dreams and Pharaoh's dreams. But let's turn back to Leah.
Yeah, I'm not gonna go back. I'm gonna go forward. I think the dreams could be interpreted as predictive. We have unnatural eating in Pharaoh's dreams of cows eating other cows, sheaves of heads of grain eating other grain, and then we're going to have unnatural eating when a stick eats a snake. We have a basically somewhat whimsical, but basically benevolent Pharaoh now, who's a dreamer, and we're moving into a time when we're going to have a Pharaoh who is paranoid, who is vicious and a vicious enslaver of Jews, who doesn't care anything about his own country. He seems to care only about the great monuments that will be built to him as a person, and is operating on a scarcity mentality. We also have the Nile, which is going to bring the cows and is also going to bring Moses. So I think Pharaoh as the conduit of life for Egypt, or what I will call the good Pharaoh, the Pharaoh that Joseph deals with, is actually concerned in whatever way he can be as supreme monarch about the people and the land. And we're going to have a Pharaoh in the future who's not concerned at all, who is vicious, paranoid, and an enslaver. And I think that we could go there.
Good. So Leah starts doing. We've been kind of laying out all of the graphing points here, and now that we've got them sort of laid out, Leah begins to do some of this. I would say kind of literary analysis. Let's really look at some of the themes and images that we're seeing across these dreams, and one of them that sort of smacks us in the face is all of the naturalistic imagery, the kind of earthy agricultural sustenance and resources imagery. Note that in Joseph's dreams there are grains growing in the field, and in Pharaoh's dreams, the second one, there are grains growing in the field, right? And Pharaoh's also got animal life and sustenance, and so we have some sense that there's some commentary on the natural world. It isn't just that Joseph's brothers bow down to him, it's the grains that they collect bowing down to Joseph, right? So that's predictive in a certain way. And if Joseph is able to think famine when he sees scorched stalks of grain in Pharaoh's dream, maybe he's been thinking about stalks of grain all along. So that's one way that we might think about some of the themes that are pervading all of these dreams, and even the middle set of dreams we don't have time for today. But also there's food and plants and those sorts of items. The other big theme that Leah named is just power, and Joseph's first dream seems to suggest that both dreams, but the way that the brothers interpret these dreams, do you mean to rule over us? Do you mean to reign over us? Well, the great ruler that is to come is Pharaoh. Pharaoh is going to rule and reign increasingly so, and ultimately, by the time we get to the book of Exodus, in a totally dominating, enslaving way. But along the way, Joseph is going to be the sort of second to Pharaoh. So there is, and this is, if Joseph's dreams are predicting anything, they seem to be predicting that Joseph's family is going to bow down to them. And this is a different class, but they do bow down to him eventually. So there's something about Joseph's dreams that are kind of predictive. But I appreciate the way Leah is keeping it broader. Like, you could extract one detail from any one of these dreams, but we're starting to see themes that stretch across these dreams that signal to us a lot of what will be happening in the upcoming chapters, which is an anxiety about the natural world and who can be the provider, the ruler over all, when the natural world is beginning to act in unpredictable, unexpected ways. Okay, good. So all of that is very good work, and I invite more of that sort of drawing of connections. But let's turn now to Stephen.
I think it's wish fulfillment. The dream follows the mouth. Mm-hmm. He hopes his dreams come true. He hopes he will rule all of Egypt. And he does, albeit a second to Pharaoh. Mm-hmm. And he rules his brothers, and his father and mother. Everybody bows down to him. Good.
Okay, good. So you are reading Joseph's dreams, I think, the way Joseph's brothers read his dreams, which is that there's some sense that, like, you hear this and you know, this is where Elizabeth started us. You don't feel like this is like a prognostication. You feel like this is a hidden desire that he wants to, this is what he wants. And not only is he expressing it through the dream, but that there's a kind of after the dream, you wonder if he isn't seeking that there isn't an ambition that was hidden in the dream that is kind of rearing its head all along, So that's and then, sorry, go ahead, Stephen.
Sorry, not only that, the dream follows the mouth can also mean you can make it happen.
Right.
You say it and you make it happen.
Right. That's right. Right. So that's what I mean by Joseph's ambition, like that eventually he's going to try to become the person who everybody bows down to. Now, with all that said, here we are getting towards the end of our hour, and we haven't gotten to the main chunk here. So I see a bunch of hands come up. I'll turn back to you soon, but I want to get to Pharaoh's dreams, which are actually this week's subject, this Parsha subject, and take everything we've been saying so far. We've already seen Pharaoh's dreams. Now I want to see Pharaoh relay those dreams and Joseph interpret those dreams. And now we can really begin to ask the question, okay, what's Joseph doing here? And is he doing it right? Is he doing it honestly? What exactly is Joseph's method? So I'm not going to read this whole thing because some of this we've seen before, but let's see what we have to read here. Okay, this is Pharaoh summons Joseph up from the prison, and he says, I've had a dream, but no one can interpret it. And now I've heard it said of you that for you to hear a dream is to interpret it, is to tell its meaning. When you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Now, this is really important, this response, because this is one clue into Joseph's method, whatever that method is. Joseph answered Pharaoh saying, Biladai, not me, Elohim yaneh et shalom paro. God will see to Pharaoh's welfare. Now, that phrasing's a little vague. Not me. God will see to Pharaoh's welfare. Okay, so that seems to mean that God's going to interpret the dream, although we don't have the voice of God come in at any point. But okay, Pharaoh then says to Joseph, okay, in my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and I went out of the Nile. I'm wondering if we have to read all of this. We'll just read through quickly. When out of the Nile came up 7 sturdy and well-formed cows and grazed in the reed grass. Presently they followed them 7 other cows, scrawny and ill-formed and emaciated. Never had I seen their likes for ugliness in all of Egypt. Okay, we were wondering before, Bob was wondering, what does Pharaoh add when he tells the dream? Well, this is an addition. Never before had I seen their likes for ugliness in all of Egypt. And then the 7 lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7 cows, the sturdy ones. But when they had consumed them, one could not tell that they had consumed them, for they looked just as bad as before. That's also an addition. And I awoke. And in my other dream, I saw 7 ears of grain full and healthy growing on a single stalk, but right behind them sprouted 7 ears, shriveled thin and scorched by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed the 7 healthy ears. I have told my magician priests, but none of them has an explanation for me. Okay, so those are Pharaoh's dreams. That's him retelling his dreams. We saw a couple of additions, but mostly it's what we had seen before. And now comes Joseph's interpretation. So this is what we're evaluating. What is Joseph doing here, and why does Joseph say this? Joseph said to Pharaoh, "Chalom paro echadhu." Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dream is one. Pharaoh has been told what God is about to do. The 7 healthy cows are 7 years, and the 7 healthy ears are 7 years. It is one dream. The 7 lean and ugly cows that followed are 7 years, as are also the 7 empty ears scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I have told Pharaoh. Pharaoh has been shown what God is about to do. Immediately ahead are 7 years of great abundance in all the land of Egypt. After them will come 7 years of famine, and all the abundance in the land of Egypt will be forgotten as the land is ravaged by famine. No trace of the abundance will be left in the land because of the famine thereafter, for it will be very severe. As for Pharaoh having had the same dream twice, it means that the matter has been determined by God and that God will soon carry it out. Okay? Now, that's the dream. That's the dream interpretation. The dream interpretation is 7 good years will be followed by 7 years of famine, and the 7 years of famine will do away with all the 7 good years. Now, Yosef gives advice afterwards, and I want to ask as we head into that, is this also from the dream, or is this just Yosef? So let's take a look at Yosef's advice. Accordingly, let Pharaoh find someone who is discerning and wise, whom you can set over the land of Egypt, and let Pharaoh take steps to appoint overseers over the land and organize the land of Egypt in the 7 years of plenty. Let all the food of these good years that are coming be gathered, and let the grain be collected under Pharaoh's authority as food to be stored in the cities. Let that food be a reserve for the land for 7 years, for the 7 years of famine which will come upon the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish in the famine. Okay, so save up during the 7 good years. Okay, that's it. That's Joseph's advice. And the last piece here is that the plan pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, could we find another like him, a man with the divine spirit? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is none so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my court, and by your command shall all my people be directed. Only with respect to the throne shall I be superior to you. Okay, that was a lot of reading. I'm sorry, but that's just I want to get all of our data points out there before we do our last round of interpretation. But okay, now you have it. We repeated Pharaoh's dreams. Perhaps you saw some extra details. And then Joseph, as is summoned, gives his interpretation. Starts, by the way, by saying, only God sees to your welfare. But then Joseph gives an interpretation. And then Joseph says, and based on that interpretation, here's what you should do. And everybody loves it. So I return to the question that I started with, which is, what is Joseph doing? And is this the right interpretation? What do you see in here? I mean, again, this is a little bit of an unfair question, because what do you mean the right interpretation? There are 7 years of famine. So perhaps the Torah means us to understand Joseph is predicting the future. This is a form of prophecy. That's a good way to read this. But are there other ways of reading? Are there parts of Joseph that are entering into this? Are there parts of Joseph's scheme that is entering into this? Are there different ways to interpret the dream? Okay, so let's take our last 10 minutes and try to get as many takes on that as we can. Let's start with Yonatan.
Is it Joseph or is it the dream? It's both. And I would love to claim credit for what I'm about to say, but really I just learned it from Rabbi Jacobson, that a dream on its own doesn't mean anything. That you need an interpreter, and the interpreter's interpretation not only changes the meaning of the dream, but to the extent that the dream has power, the interpreter's interpretation changes reality. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai used this to get us rabbinic Judaism. He negotiated with Vespasian to interpret his dream in a way that would be favorable to Vespasian. But if we don't believe in the power of interpretation, then why would that matter, right? And Rabbi Jacobson quoted a Talmud that I don't remember exactly where it is. I think it's in Berachot, that there was a dream interpreter who, a man came to him and said, I had a dream that I was standing in a port and a ship was sailing away. And the dream interpreter said, oh, that means you're going to die. And the man died. The interpreter's colleagues all said, that was a harsh interpretation. Like, you could have read this a million different ways. And the interpreter said, yeah, he didn't pay me enough last time he came to have a dream read. And that way the interpreter basically killed the client. Joseph here has the role very much. I mean, even if you don't believe in this power of interpretation, in stepping into this role, he makes his interpretation correct. And in so doing, he manifests the will of God.
Yeah. Okay, great. This is great. This is sort of a really fascinating middle position, because we've been considering the notion that dreams have some hidden message. Maybe God is sending them that Joseph is decoding. Okay. Or on the other hand, this idea that dreams are actually not tracking with the real world at all. They're just insights into a person's fears, anxieties, hopes, character, the way that a modern psychologist might read dreams. And this is sort of an interesting middle position, which is that through the interpretation, part of what an interpretation is to render the dream with some applicability to reality. And in doing that, it's almost like you make the dream manifest in the world. And Joseph goes further and suggests, and given what I've interpreted, here's how you should act. And that sets in motion a chain of events that is, it's as if everybody is now allowed to behave as if this is the meaning of the dream, and they carry it out that way, and then that becomes the meaning of the dream. So there's some there's a way of the word poter, interpret, in modern Hebrew also means to solve, right? To solve for something. So Joseph comes up with a solution that will account perhaps for the premonitions of the dream, but then by extracting that solution, that becomes the meaning of the dream. And that I think is a fascinating kind of middle ground. And as Yonatan suggested, it's also there's a part of it that sounds metaphysical, like he makes it true, but there's also part of it that's practical, like he puts himself in the position to carry exactly this stuff out, so then it becomes true. So I think that's a really interesting resolution. Jen?
Yeah, I'm struck by a couple of things, and one is that his original dreams have not yet come true. And yet between those dreams and the dreams with Pharaoh, he has become the dream guy. Like, they backfired terribly, those first dreams, and yet I'm imagining him hanging around in Egypt, just interpreting everybody's dream enthusiastically. And I'm also struck by this idea that I got from listening to Yonatan, that the act of interpretation is an act of connecting with God. That's kind of what Joseph is saying here, which is also what we're doing. Also a huge foundation of our tradition is the act of interpreting is an act of connecting to God. And Joseph is the one who's so faithful to that, even when it's not clear that that interpretation is bearing fruit yet.
This is so great. What Jen is saying is so great, because it's so important for not just our understanding of the dream sequences in Genesis, but really our whole relationship to Torah. And we are interpreters of Torah. This language of interpret, right, is a very is very big for us to be an interpreter. I often say I'm looking for interpretations from this group. That's what we do with dreams and with language and with the Torah itself, is we interpret. And what Jen suggested, I think, so powerfully, is that interpretation is a kind of human activity, but it is an attempt, when we're looking at the Torah or dreams or mysteries of any sort. Joseph keeps saying, Hala Elohim Pitronim, the interpretations are God's. In other words, we do believe that there's some message that's coming from God. So when we interpret, we are kind of drawing out God's message into some reality, some manifestation, and it requires us to get the divine message. It requires, in other words, not just the channeling of prophecy, but actually the interpreting of some message. That says something about dreams, but it also says something about all of our interpretation. Aren't we trying to discern divine message when we interpret the Torah? But when I do interpret the Torah, do I know that that's what God was saying? I don't know that, but I am trying to convey some divine message through the method of interpretation. So I think that's very powerful. All right, one more comment from Richard, and then we'll close.
This is kind of approaching this from a very different angle, and not so much about whether the dream is true or not, but the sort of growth of Joseph in terms of how he handles his dreams as a 17-year-old, and then how he handles his dream as a 30-year-old. As a 17-year-old, he's sort of like this loose cannon that doesn't know that don't talk about the dream, right? And you sort of watch him talk about the dream as this whole independent act of immaturity. And then in this one, it's sort of about the interplay with being able to exercise this power, but pivot to using it. And so in verse 33, where he immediately goes, but by the way, here's what you need. Here's the plan, and you need someone to run the plan. So it's sort of a partnership, where there's agency, and it's not just the dreams handed to you, but you have to seize opportunity. Yeah, that's great, Richard, and really helpful. And I feel like, as you say, that there's some trajectory. It is some Joseph trajectory. How does he go from being the dreamer to the dream interpreter? And now I feel like, what we really need to understand that is the middle set of dreams, because that's the transition. And he starts out as a dreamer, and then suddenly, and sure, he had dreams, so have other people, but it isn't until we get the end of Parshat Vayeshev, last week's Parsha, and suddenly the prisoners have had dreams, that Joseph just says, well, tell me your dreams and let's see what we can make them. Something has happened to him
And remember, what has happened? He's been sold to slavery in Egypt. He's worked in and been sexually harassed. And, he's gone through a lot in the interim. And something Richard suggests, and I think this is another class. This is sort of like the next step here is to try to figure out, okay, how do we get from the first dreams to the second dreams? And those middle dreams are critical. Yeah. We have one more minute. And so I want to offer one last thing, which is a stream of interpretations that I found that unlocked at least part of this mystery for me when I asked the question, how did Pharaoh know that Joseph's dreams were correct? How did he just that's it, that's correct? And I want to just point your attention to what Joseph says that immediately when Pharaoh gives his dreams. The first thing that Joseph says to Pharaoh is, Pharaoh's dream is one. Chalom paro echadhu. The dream of Pharaoh is one. Okay. Now, that's the meaning of that is, in context, it's all about the same thing. But the Sforno, an Italian, 15th century Italian commentator, takes notice of that language and says that Pharaoh noted that all of his professional wise men proceeded from the premise that they had to interpret two separate dreams. But Pharaoh was convinced that it was one dream, as he himself had said when telling it and introducing the narrative in verse 22 with the words, Bechalomi, in my dream. So when Joseph said Pharaoh's dream is one, and that is why all your interpreters have failed to come up with the correct answer. In other words, Pharaoh felt somehow that he had had two dreams, but in his gut, he knew that they were one dream. And this is pretty remarkable, if you go back and you look at Pharaoh's dreams, it's always one dream. Hine chalom. It was a dream, not two dreams, but one dream. And he always uses that language to describe, I have had a dream, in my dream. And I inserted other to make it make sense, but really every time Pharaoh says, I've had a dream, I've had a dream, I've had a dream. And Joseph picks up on that Pharaoh understood something about it. He didn't understand the full meaning, but for all of those who were suggesting that a dream interpreter has to listen carefully to the language of the teller, these comments by the Sforno suggest exactly that Joseph was listening carefully and that he picked up on something that Pharaoh was already feeling. And so that when he filled out the rest of the picture, Pharaoh felt, oh, yes, that's right. It was one dream, and whatever else you're saying must be true. So we've had a lot of possibilities offered here, and I won't say that this is the only way to understand Joseph's powers of dream interpretation, but this is one interesting clue that we can read into the language itself, that maybe Joseph was drawing on his old dream experiences and some of the themes that have carried through, but also listening carefully to the language of Pharaoh's telling of his dream and picking up from that some inner insight that Pharaoh has into his own dreams. And I agree with those who have said that a dream may have a meaning in itself, but there really is no understanding the dream without understanding how the person dreaming has experienced it and tells it back. So both of those things are at play here. And I think for Joseph as well, there's a lot of interpreting going on here. There's dream interpretation, but there's also person interpretation. And probably most psychologists would tell you the same. So anyway, that's a good run through what is an area of our Torah that requires further investigation, to be sure. The area of dream interpretation. Okay, well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I will see you next week. Oh, and Hanukkah Sameach. I hope everybody has a beautiful last lighting tonight.